Metropole TVKE across all your social media platforms. Thank you very much for choosing to begin your day with us here this morning. My name is Simba Elijah Charles Kiage. We have a jam-packed session for you this morning. Let me take time to introduce the three areas that our economic review is going to touch on. Number one, we're going to talk about how Safaricom's share price is actually running. On the local boost, we'll be telling you exactly what it is that you'll be looking forward to this morning. Also talking about the tea trends in the country as well, and how now close to over 1 million, as over 1.7 million Sacco members in the country, talking about the deposit taking Saccos, are now dormant members, in the sense that they are not depositing anymore as a result of the coronavirus pandemic. Let's open with that story this morning, where the Sacco Society's regulatory authority, SASFA, now indicates that the number of savers who had stopped making contributions to Saccos jumped 79.5% from 764,472 in 2019 to 1.372 million last year, on the back of a COVID-19 economic disruptions. This number means that inactive Sacco members have jumped to 25.09% of the 5.4 million total membership, compared to 16.95% reported in 2019. According to the regulator, these numbers are indicative of the business closures as well as layoffs, pay cuts, and unpaid leave that headline the economy in 2020, making it a struggle for members to make regular payments to the Saccos, a factor that also contributed heavily to the mounting loan defaults among the 175 Saccos. The data also reveals that despite the increase in dormant savers, the number of Sacco members making regular savings in the 175 deposit-taking Saccos increased from 4.5 million to 5.4 million after the regulator licensed three new players, Ushuru, Kimesitu, and Akimena. Now, the total assets within deposit-taking Sacco system grew to reach 627.68 billion in 2020 from 556.71 billion recorded in 2019. Total deposits grew by 13.41% to 431.46 billion in 2020 from 380.44 billion in 2019. Let's cross over and look at this data that we have for you this morning as well. Let's look at those key performance indicators for deposit-taking Saccos for the financial year 2020. And that core capital is exactly what is going to be a conversation point this morning, and the capital reserve ratios that we have in this Saccos as well, and not net loans and advances as well, is going to be that area that we're going to talk about this morning as well. Let's cross over to the next area of conversation point. Now let's look at where we are as of market share. So if you look at the market share for the deposit-taking Saccos in the country, 72% are those, this blue area here, are those with total assets above 5 billion, followed by 23%. Those are total assets between 1 billion and 5 billion. 5% are those total assets below 1 billion. So you can actually say majority of the deposit-taking Saccos in the country have total assets above 1 billion shillings. Let's cross over to the next area of our conversation point this morning as well. You will see we're talking about that area as well in terms of total assets. Again, in 2020, you will see that number was a bit smaller, because those ones in 2020 that had total assets below 1 billion, above 1 billion, sorry, were 62%. Those between 1 billion and 5 billion were 30%, and 8% was total assets below 1 billion shillings. Let's cross over to the next area this morning as well. You will see that the number of Saccos based on asset and deposit size in the financial year 2020, that's the same thing that we're talking about. Now let's talk about that. Total assets of above 5 billion here we are talking about 34 of those as well. You can see our total assets between 1 billion and 5 billion, and you can look at where the total deposits are, because we're talking about 23 billion, we're talking about 53 billion in that area. We're also talking about total assets below 1 billion. Under that area, you will see that deposits are the ones that are actually crossing to that 99 billion level. Now let's cross over and talk about that unemployment data in a Q3 as well. We're going to come back to this. Let's cross over to that unemployment data in a Q3. Yes, look at that number, 1,368,606. Fantastic. All right, as we look at that data, let's cross over to Arnold and Gusale this morning. Arnold, good morning, sir.
Good morning to you, Simba.
Let's talk about that. And Arnold, I want us to begin from this area as well. That, well, despite us talking about 1.372 million Sacco members who might now be inactive, let's talk about that. But total assets within those Saccos, we're talking about deposit taking Saccos, grew to reach 627.68 billion in 2020 from 556.701 in 2019. Total deposits also grew within that period, 13.41% to 431.46 billion in 2020 from 380.44 billion in 2019. Arnold, we're talking about the effect of the coronavirus pandemic, pushing 1.3 million Kenyans to be inactive Sacco members. But then at the same time, we're talking about the assets in that system growing and deposits as well growing. How do we put that data into proper sense, Arnold?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for that extrapolation. I think we need to consider several things. I think the first part of the data we've analyzed simply shows the conventional position of contributions vis-a-vis the employed individuals.
Yes.
So ordinarily, most Saccos in Kenya are tied to organizations. So you find an organization, maybe it's Safaricom, and then it has a Sacco which is tied to it, or maybe the Kenya Police, and then you have a Sacco tied to it. So ordinarily, most of the members in that Sacco are employees of the organization which is tied to that particular Sacco. So you have a situation whereby, if you look at the data we've been seeing in, particularly with the effects of COVID-19 in 2020, is that we've had a reduced number of people who are formally employed. So the narrative goes that by extension leads to people stop contributing to their monthly subscriptions as far as Saccos are concerned.
Yes.
In most cases, what actually happens is that people actually put money in the Saccos for two reasons, either for borrowings within the same Sacco or for a rainy day. So what happened in the initial phase of that period is that most guys who had actually saved went back to the Saccos to get the money they had put aside for a rainy day. But then again, you've pointed out something extremely important, whereby you've had the asset base of the entire Sacco. If you look at the entire data of the Saccos, you've seen an increment in the asset base and also the deposits. And that has been, of course, because of the addition of the new Saccos, the likes of Kimisitu, the likes of Ushuru. And we realize some of these Saccos have actually diverted or diverged from the usual conventional ways in which Saccos get members.
Yes.
As I mentioned before, most Saccos are tied to organizations. So you find that it's actually the employees of that organization who actually save in those Saccos. But the Saccos you just mentioned, the likes of Kimisitu, have gone further, whereby they actually get deposits from quote-unquote non-members. So what they've done, they've essentially opened their net, so to speak, whereby if you do not necessarily need to be a member of a particular organization for you to save in that particular Sacco. As long as someone in that particular Sacco has introduced you, then you can be a member and contribute. And those Saccos are actually the ones who've contributed to that particular increment in the deposits and the asset base. Saccos like Safaricom, Sacco, and Kimisitu, these are Saccos which are very dynamic, and you can actually get membership as long as you go there and you have a referral, you can actually get membership.
Yes.
Safaricom Sacco has actually gone a notch higher, whereby you can even just download the app, do your registration, fill in your normal KYC details, and actually become a member. And what they've done in terms of contributions, they've actually split those contributions whereby you can be building your position as far as share capital is concerned, and also do a minimum monthly contribution, and that's why that particular asset base has gone up. Also, something key to mention about these SACCOs, which are now growing their membership apart from the conventional means of membership, is that particular way of growing, guys, has actually gotten people across the sector and even in the diaspora.
Yes.
Still to mention, the likes of Safaricom Sacco, they have a huge membership which spans all the way in the diaspora, particularly because of the way they've embraced technology. They have an app whereby anyone essentially can join in, and for the borrowings they have a pool of what you would call guys who can actually guarantee you. There's a pool of guys who can guarantee you, whereby they will simply look at your scan your KYC and look at your month-on-month contribution, and thereby and from there they can actually be in a position to guarantee you. So it's it's data whereby you need to analyze from two perspectives. One perspective, the conventional position, guys losing jobs, and guys going back for the monies they put aside for any day. And then on the other side, SACCOs which have actually gone out of their way and moved from the conventional way of mobilizing deposits, and actually led to contribution in the increase in the asset base and the total deposits.
Pretty much. All right, just before I cross over to George, your question is going to come from this area as well. Let's again look at that data of a market share of this deposit-taking SACCOs in the country. If you jump onto that data, Richie, if you may, just market share for the financial year 2020, yes, that's where we are. Then you will say that under that area, under total assets above 5 million, you find that majority of them, that's where they are, 62% over the 175 as well. Total assets between 1 billion and 5 billion, 30%. You're going to see that total assets between, below 1 billion, that's where we have 8% of these SACCOs in the country. Now let's jump to the next data set. We shall just guide you from here so that we have that properly. Yes, that's the one we're actually looking for. So we look at number of deposits taking SACCOs based on asset and deposit size by 2020, and you'll see total assets, that's where we are. But if you look at that total deposit, you'll find that majority of those that had bigger assets are the ones that actually did not have a lot of deposits as well. Because if you say total assets 34 billion, you get deposits of up to 23 billion. Total assets between 1 billion and 5 billion, they had total deposits of 53 billion. Total assets between below 1 billion, they had deposits of up to 99 B. George, question being therefore, and good morning, sir. Happy to have you around.
Morning.
When you look at that data, George, how do you also put it into proper context, in the sense that the bigger the asset base, the lesser the deposit that you're actually receiving in a 2020? Looks like the smaller SACCOs were attracting much more deposits in a 2020 than their bigger counterparts. How do you look into that data set, George, and internalize it?
Thank you. Thank you, Elijah. I want just to give you a background, small background on the SACCO sector.
Yes.
The SACCO subsector in Kenya contributes around 5.5% of our national GDP, which is quite a substantial contribution in our GDP.
Yes.
In terms of demographics, Elijah, we have around 4.97 million persons who are registered with one SACCO or the other. That is both natural persons and even corporate membership.
Yes.
Therefore, the SACCO subsector is a sector that is very key in our economy. And over the years, Elijah, the SACCO substantial financial markets, and in terms of economic growth, you realize that the country has relied very heavily on the SACCO subsector to be able to spur not only those in the agriculture subsector, but even in the other economic subsectors in the economy. Remember when the country decided to introduce SACCOs in the maternity industry? That shows you the importance of SACCOs in our economic development. Now, getting back to your question, remember, we have so many SACCOs that have assets or that share capital below a billion. As my colleague had said, Arnold, most of these SACCOs are tied to specific organizations or to specific of SACCOs. That is the absolute numbers of SACCOs that have assets or share below a billion, but have quite a heavy membership. That explains why the bigger percentage. There is a bigger percentage of SACCOs that have assets below a billion, but have very huge deposits. That's up to 9 billion. The bigger SACCOs, Elijah, that you can count on are quite few. Yes. You might mention SACCOs like Harambee Sacco, Ukulima Sacco, the Kenya Police, quite few. A big number of SACCOs lie on the SACCOs that hold assets of less than a billion, and they accommodate most of the membership in terms of the natural persons that register with them. That explains those statistics, Elijah. When you come to what you asked about the shifts in terms of savings between 2019 and 2020, as my brother had initially mentioned, remember that most of these SACCOs have their members within an organization. Like, for example, what I will say, Safaricom members have Safaricom SACCO, and you realize that there was a bit of shake-up in terms of either layoffs or redundancies altogether during 2020 or 2021 because of the pandemic. That explains why we had a bit of shift in terms of savings between 2019 and 2020. But that does not underscore the fact that there is a substantial increase in assets or deposits held by deposit-taking SACCOs, and that is explained by the fact that SASRA registered, I think, 4 or 5 SACCOs in the deposit-taking SACCOs. That gives us the shift in the deposits that now are accounted for under the SACCOs that fall under SASRA regulation. So, Elijah, the SACCO subsector, my parting shot is, it holds quite a huge chunk of our GDP growth. It is a sector that each and every economic analyst or any person at our economic planning must look into and must address any challenges that might affect it, be it now or the future, Elijah.
Pretty much. George, sorry, Arnold, just quickly, if you may, on this other subject as well. Could we also allude the growth in the asset bases of the deposit-taking SACCOs in the country by their unwillingness or by the low rate of lending in the entire over that 2020 as the economy got into the coronavirus pandemic, or just because of the addition of these 3 other members to the regulated SACCO system, that's why we are seeing this increased deposits from that specific subsector?
Very good point, Simba. I think that is also a crucial point. I think what we saw last year with banks, I think most banks were caught on lending because of COVID-19 and how businesses were affected. Any analyst would look at how the market was and would say, slow down on your lending. So most of the banks were simply lending either to the government or trying to invest on non-funded options as far as sources of revenue are concerned.
Yes.
So that is actually true. There was a significant chunk of people in the SME who looked for alternative sources of credit. Those were mobile phone applications and also SACCOs. So that is actually true in terms of increase in asset base. A significant chunk of people in the SME actually went back to the SACCOs and got credit from those SACCOs, because as I mentioned before, some of the SACCOs we're looking at have diversified their product offering, and that has actually brought in a lot of borrowings, which has increased their asset base. So that is actually a fact to consider, Simba.
Pretty much. Gentlemen, I'd like us to move into the next part of our conversation this morning, where multinational firms will now follow the Ministry of Agriculture and are setting minimum prices for their teas at the Mombasa auction in a move directed towards cushioning them against losses occasioned by the low cost of the commodity in the market. Now, the Kenya Tea Growers Association, KTGA, an umbrella body for the multinational farms, has already informed the East Africa Tea Traders Association, EATA, which is in charge of the auction, informing it of this latest move, which follows the Ministry of Agriculture's move to institute reserve price for smallholder farmers at the auction. KTGA Chief Executive Officer Apollo Kiari laments the high cost of production, which is pushing the majority of farmers to the brink of poverty due to the continued low prices at the auction. This will mean that brokers will receive direction from the members direct on the minimum price that is should be sold for. We don't have him this morning. Mr. Paulo Kiari, good morning, sir. How are you doing?
Good morning, Simba. How are you doing in Nairobi?
Fantastic. All right, let's begin this conversation like this. This is a move that we've seen after the Ministry of Agriculture also instituted a cap on all teas from KTDA. So talk to me about that. Are you following that move in what is seen as your action to correct what is going on in the market right now, Apollo?
Okay, thank you, Ranger. What is happening in the tea industry over the last few months is that the prices at the auction have continued to plummet.
Yes.
And it makes it difficult for the farmers, the growers, to be able to meet the cost of production. The CS, in his wisdom, did direct the smallholder tea growers through KTDA to instruct their brokers not to sell their teas below a certain minimum. That was followed suit by what we call the independent tea producers also, who are not neither free tea growers association which I represent.
Yes.
And what is happening is that over time, and I've said it several times in this platform, is that the business of growing tea in the country is so expensive. Cost of production has continued to escalate over the last 10, 20 years without a commensurate escalation of prices. Actually, over the last 10 years, prices have continued to go down, making it very difficult for anybody to break even in the business. So we are talking of a price that is below the cost of production.
Yes.
To give you a clear example is that in our sector, the plantation subsector, our cost of production is between 190 shillings to 200 shillings for a kilo of made tea. Whereas at the auction over the last 2 months, you've seen the prices going down to about 150 shillings, 140 shillings. And that means that what we are getting at the auction does not meet what we are spending in terms of producing that kilo of tea.
Yes.
So what we've decided to do as the plantation subsector is not precisely to follow the instructions of the CAs. We've reviewed and we've talked about it in many forums. We've made submissions to Parliament. We've made submissions to the Ministry. We've made submissions to the Tea Board of Kenya that something needs to be done about cost of production. For us in the plantation sector, we bear all the costs, and especially labor, which constitutes about 50 to 60% of the cost of production. The smallholder farmers, they use their household labor. So their cost of production at the garden is very minimal. We pay about 15 shillings a kilo to a tea packer, whereas the smallholder farmers pay about 9 shillings to a packer.
Yes.
So our other costs are so enormous. And talk about energy, talk about electricity, talk about fuel, talk about the licensing and the legal statutory payments that we do. Talk about all the costs that we incur when we are producing this tea as an organization, vis-a-vis what a smallholder expends. So we've been saying that we need to look at cost of production, we need to look at cost of labor, we need to look at cost of energy, we need to look at transportation cost, warehousing cost, all of them, the entire value chain, so that we can be able to break even. But nothing has ever happened. So in our own wisdom, and when we sat down as plantation growers, we decided we need to review what is our cost of production. Are we getting that in the auction? Are the forces of supply and demand at play, or there's something else that is happening? The determination by the CAS to determine a minimum price is not sustainable because not all of us are homogeneous. We produce our teas using different methods. We produce different qualities of tea. So, and they do not all fetch the same price. So you'll find that when you say that this is your minimum, the buyer will ask you, even for the dust, even for the low quality tea, are you asking me to pay this price? It's not possible. So what we are saying is that we will ask our brokers to do proper valuation of our teas and tell the buyers that this particular producer wants a minimum, this kind of price.
Yes.
To meet the cost of production. So that is the discussion that is ongoing. We cannot precisely dictate because this is a commodity. This is not a vehicle that is coming from the production line with a set price.
Yes.
This is a commodity price that is determined by the forces of supply and demand. It's a global product that is drunk all over the world. So when there's demand in the world market, then there's prices go up.
Yes.
But as we speak right now, Reja, in the next 2 months, production will be too high because it's been raining west of the rift. And within the next 2 months, the crop will be very high. With the trend that we are seeing, we don't envisage a situation whereby the prices will go to where we are right now. So we are in a catch-22 situation, and we're wondering, is it able to doing this kind of business? So that's the situation we are right.
Pretty much. Apollo, I would like to take a 1 minute break. Once we come back, the question is going to say, we saw exactly what the Ministry of Agriculture capped it at. Are we about to get sort of an approximate from you this morning on what we expect that to be capped at? And what areas are you looking at? And the question for you, whether everybody is listening to, can we find a solution, a lasting solution, other than this minimum prices that we're setting for our local teas here? Once we come back on a Business I Am, we're still with Apollo Kiari, George Munga, and Arnold Ngasale. We're still talking about the biggest headlines that you're waking up to this morning. We'll be back with them shortly.